Janice Charette, named as Canada's top trade negotiator. She's the infamous one that's in committee there did the note and the recommendation to Justin Trudeau to invoke the Emergencies Act. And that was Janice Charette in a confidential memo prior to the government's invoking the Emergency Act. And then we have the story that Holly Doan did at the time. She was at the time making $343,000 as a clerk of the Privy Council, wrote in a memo that the protest, remember this word very strongly, threatened social cohesion and national unity. We must leave no stone unturned. And that's, she testified in the Public Order Emergency Commission. We have to make sure to looking at every power, duty, every authority we have, every resource we have, to make sure we're bringing the full power of the federal government and its resources. All hands on deck, no idea too crazy. Let's look at absolutely everything. This now was challenged in court. The court ruled that it was an illegal use of the Emergencies Act. The Liberals challenged that right away, Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland. I think within minutes they challenged that. They said they were going to challenge it. The appeal court came back and said that the original decision stands. We still haven't heard anything from any media calling them out, asking for resignations, nothing like that. The biggest thing is the strangeness of it, is the silence of it. And then here is Mark Carney appointing her as the lead negotiator for CUSMA. Is that also a testament to Dominic LeBlanc as a failure? Or how does she become the lead negotiator? And how come she's not answering to this?
She's taken over the job of the previous ambassador. That's who was doing it before, not Dom LeBlanc. I think the most fascinating thing about this, though, and you sort of, maybe you're so inured to this craziness that you just passed over it, but in the Blacklocks article there, which is what we're quoting from, she says, these are her words, "We had evidence through both what was being said and online of incredibly violent rhetoric, of hate speech, anti-Semitic, anti-gay, transphobic, misogynistic death threats to elected officials, to senior officials." That was her justification. You said that she said, let's use all measures. That's why. That was her justification for using all measures. In this case, or in the event, the Emergencies Act, which is the most extreme legislation that exists in Canada. It's what you invoke when you need to go into an existential war with an opponent that might destroy your country. That's what that act is for. And she thought, this is just an indication, I think, of the progressive mindset. She thought that this list of things that she said that there's evidence that the Freedom Convoy is guilty of, a list of things that you would hear about in a humanities department from a Marxist trained academic, transphobia, misogyny. I mean, all the, like, that to me is kind of surreal, that this woman, the chief public servant, she saw what was going on there. By the way, there wasn't really very much evidence of that at all. There was some tiny fringe elements, but whatever, we'll forget that for a second. She saw that and she thought, like Captain Picard, shields up, red alert, you know, arm the torpedoes. Like, this is war now. This is the equivalent of like the Nazis are going to bomb us kind of thing. This is like the Luftwaffe is in the skies. Let's suspend democracy. Because there are some people in downtown Ottawa who, they're pretty transphobic, you know, and misogynistic. We got to deal with that. Also, that's precisely the same language used by Justin Trudeau. And Justin Trudeau, when he tried to justify using the Emergencies Act, he used this language, didn't he? The exact language. And it makes me think, I mean, I'm sure he's a clever enough boy to come up with this kind of nonsense himself, but sure, this played into his decision and his repeated use of that language. So I just find that very interesting. And then there's one last thing I would add, since they mentioned anti-Semitism, anti-gay and all the rest of it, and threats against, violent rhetoric, threats against politicians. What was the sort of year or 2 years of pro-Hamas rallies? What was that? Was that anti-Semitic maybe? Could it maybe have been anti-Semitic? Could you consider that? Was the Emergencies Act invoked? Again, more evidence of who it is that governs you, who they bat for, what they think. Whose side they're on?
There was no national emergency within the meaning of the law. That's from the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, which challenged the Emergencies Act in court. Profoundly disturbing. And the protest may lead to irremediable harms, including to social cohesion, national unity, and Canadians' international reputation. That's from Charette. This social cohesion continues to come up. Mark Miller used it just the other day. We talked about it. They're still pushing this social cohesion. And the Civil Liberties Union Association also said national emergencies that authorize extraordinary powers cannot be in the eye of the beholder. Again, Justin Trudeau refused to talk to these people that were out there in a mainly peaceful protest with noise violations and parking violations, refused to talk to them, and then invoked the Emergencies Act based on her recommendation. And it's been, 2 courts have now decided that it was the illegal use of that and a violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or the Canadian Charter. And no answer, no answer. Nobody's answering to it. And the worst part is, the media that gets access hasn't even asked the question.
And won't, by the way.
Here's a little clip from Janice Charette on the negotiating skills of Canada's trade committees.
I would not underestimate how the people, Donald Trump and the people around him, are going to use what we're going to see in terms of price impacts, job impacts, as a way of kind of doubling down on, Canada's not our friend, they're taking advantage of us, and now they're taking advantage of you, American worker, American consumer. I think this is a very big vulnerability that we got to get ahead of really fast. I would not underestimate how the people...
It's the other clip there, on the other side there.
We actually, I think, have amongst the best trade negotiators in the world. And in fact, they've been described to me as ninja trade negotiators for Canada. We have managed to negotiate, trade agreements, 15 different trade agreements around the world. We actually, I think, have amongst...
Where are they? Where are those trade agreements? Like, they are ninja because they're all in disguise somewhere, or they're hidden. I have no idea. Where are they?
I would say that that's not braggadocio, empty braggadocio. That is actually, lots of people say that all over the world, that Canada's trade negotiators are very, very good. So, but ultimately they can only do what they're instructed to do, or they can, the final decision, at least, is always made by the political class, which is different from the trade negotiators. They're not the same thing.
I don't want to dwell on this too long, but it's just odd that they appointed her, and then the media doesn't even really reference. I think one of the media outlets said, she's has a little bit unfavorable with some of the people in Canada. Not this one. We won't play the clip though, because it just obviously they're beaming about her, and she's going to be this top negotiator. But it's crazy. No media is asking the question. Nobody's been held to account for the Freedom Convoy. The use of the Emergencies Act, which has happened how many times in Canada? And this time for hateful speech?
I think it was invoked during the predecessor, which was called, I think, the War Measures Act or something like that, wasn't it? That was invoked during the
Quebec thing.
crisis.
Yeah, the Quebec crisis, yeah.
And that was when, the British, the British ambassador or something like that was, or High Commissioner was kidnapped, I think.
Yeah, there was an actually kidnapping and stuff of politicians.
Yeah, and a murder as well.
This one was parking violations and noise violations.
Yeah. Well, even that was controversial, by the way, when it was invoked back then, when it was some would say a real crisis. So it's it truly is the break glass in emergencies kind of thing. It suspends the entire democratic system, and the constitutional system is suspended. It's like It's what you do in a war. It's what you do when it's life or death. And like I say, I just have to highlight once again that when she was justifying this life or death measure that suspends the Constitution and all of our rights, she justified it by saying there are people in the street who are uttering hate speech and misogynistic speech and transphobia and a long list of progressive classifications of danger, basically, very, very sort of progressive language. If we had a curious media, I mean, there's some people in the comments already saying, like, what did you expect? And trust me, I didn't expect anything else. I'm not surprised. But if we had a curious media, this would all be spelled out. This would all be looked at, and it would be the public service, just like the CBC. I mean, I know how funny that is, but the public service is meant to be above all politics, and all suggestion of politics. And yet the head of the public service, who's now just been given this glorious job by Mark Carney, justified using that act with politics, very particular politics as well, of the sort of urban, progressive, American university style leftism.
Social cohesion, democracy, those words conflict with each other. And it seems like it's used a lot. CBC was talking about social cohesion. Mark Miller we did a story on it. Mark Miller wants more social cohesion. He wants you to trust just the CBC because they promote social cohesion. You can also read that as you will be assimilated. They should get out of the way and let independent media get access to some of these politicians because they're not bothering to answer any questions. We're going to have MP Michael Cooper on here today, but we're trying to get on Liberal MPs. We're trying to get on as many people as we can to ask the questions that the government state broadcaster refuses to answer, and they have access. They would rather wait for their sausage roll than ask questions that are on everybody's mind. Who's going to answer to the invoking of the Emergencies Act? And this is another reward for somebody that was one of the key players in it. Janice wrote the memo, and that hate, I mean, if you want to talk about hate speech, that piece she wrote was hate speech, because she used every label she could in the label gun to label these people, to minimize them and marginalize them as not having the rights to even speak out against this government.
I would also say, I mean, I'm not sure we're going to have time to ask him about it, so we might as well talk about it now, but Michael Cooper has personal experience of what you just mentioned, of guilt by association and the label gun, as you called it, because silly old Michael Cooper didn't do a 360, CIA-style scan of the crowd when he did an interview at the Freedom Convoy a few years ago. And as a consequence, there was a flag behind him. And if you zoomed in, you could see what looked like a 2-year-old had tried to draw a swastika on a flag. And he was condemned in attempts to make him seem like a really bad guy. And then he had to kind of like step back and do the usual things. And I think that was about 2 months before Chrystia Freeland held up that flag, or she stood right in front of that flag from, what was it, the Azov battalion or something? It was some kind of like fascist associated military unit or militia or something in Ukraine. And there was, as I'm sure you can remember, it feels like it wasn't that long ago, even though it was a few years ago, but that was just brushed aside with Chrystia Freeland, and it became
never happened.
The story
never
became,
happened.
yeah, but the story became all of these nasty actors are trying to exploit this situation to make it look like Chrystia Freeland is sympathetic with fascists or something like that. It's like, and it was all about misinformation online. Read the stories about Michael Cooper, where it was like, Tory MP distances himself from, or Tory MP photographed next to swastika at Freedom Convoy. Things like, just look at the way it's framed. Very interesting. But if we have him for a while, I don't know how long we're going to have a chat with him. Maybe we can see what he thinks of that now in retrospect. But he is an example. The chap that we're going to speak to is an example of how people were defamed merely for going down and speaking, or just speaking to people who were protesting, in a peaceful way. So it seems like another world now, doesn't it? Because it really was a crazy time, that. But it all happened.
The CBC is not only biased, and the CTV is not only biased, they also act as a shield. They act as a shield. They move on from stories like the Chrystia Freeland one, and then they target the people they want to target. They act as a shield. No questions on the Freedom Convoy and the invoking of the Emergencies Act. That is absolutely ludicrous. I mean, that's not happening. That's absolutely crazy. Somebody sent a gift membership. Thank you for that, Charles McDonald. Appreciate that. As we try to grow this, support the local independent media here. We need to do more. We need to get access to these MPs because this government funded for $1.6 billion. That lady right there works for that corporation, CBC. $1.6 billion, and they can't come up with that question. They should just watch the show. We can give them some of the questions. They're more than willing, just like Polyev says, you can take my questions, take my platforms, take my ideas, take our questions, ask the questions. Absolutely crazy.